Good morning. Good to see you guys. I hope you had a good week this week and are ready for today as we roll into week 2 of our series, The Thing Behind the Thing. This week was a good week for me. Just 2 days ago, my wife and I celebrated 22 years of marriage, and we got to ditch our kids and go out to eat together, just the two of us. It was delightful, and she renewed her subscription for at least another year, and so I'm so excited about that. I do want to just say before we jump into this today that we have something happening right after our second service today, and that is our Discover class. And so if you've been coming here for a little while, maybe today is even your first day, or maybe you've been coming for a long time and you've just sort of been attending, but you're like, man, I want to sort of know more about, like, how do I get more involved? How do I meet friends? How do I sort of get to know, like, why do you guys do some of the quirky things you do around here? We do have reasons for most of it, and we talk about those reasons in our Discover class, which is today after our second service. So for you guys, that means you've got time to go home, take a quick nap, get a coffee, whatever you want to do, and come back. And we are serving free lunch. We've got childcare that's provided as well, and just a great opportunity for you to get to know why we do what we do as a church and how you can be a bigger part of it here at South Hills. And so hopefully some of you will turn around and make that. You don't have to have RSVP'd. You can just show up, and we'll be more than happy to hang out with you there. And so today we are going to dive into the first of the 7 primal questions. And last week was a bit of a setup week. How many of you went home at some point, you took the primal questions quiz? Some of you are just like, what are you talking about? Am I even allowed to be here right now? There's actually a quiz that you can take. If you haven't taken it yet, you can scan the QR code right here and either save that for later or just take it real quick, like while I'm doing the introduction, and find out what your primal question is. If you're just like, I don't know how QR codes work, it's too complicated for me. I don't have a cell phone, so I don't know how to do that whole thing. You can just go to our website at any point in time, southhills.org, and you can take the quiz. It pops up for you. But we're going to be talking about the 7 primal questions, the things that sort of drive our behavior, the things that we hold sort of inside, the thing behind the thing. And I'll tell you, as we dive into each one of these things, even when we're on a week where you're like, that's not my question, this isn't what the quiz said, it'll still apply to you. It'll still have something to do with you, because the truth of the matter is, each of these questions are an expression of a core human need that every single human has. And so there's a little bit of each one of these in each one of us. It's just that there's one that is sort of driving, like, mostly a lot of what we do, a lot of the way we see the world. And whether it's your question or not, I think you can take something away from this on how to interact with people who this is their primal question. And I think that if you take in the information and begin to adjust the way that you treat people in your life, it'll improve every relationship that you have. And so buckle up. It's going to be a fun time these next 7 weeks. And if you're taking notes today, which I highly suggest, the title of my message is Safety First. Safety first. And that is because the first primal question we're going to tackle is, am I safe? Safety first. It's a kind of a play on words. You guys will catch it later. It'll make sense and be very clever. Now, I don't know if you realize this, but as I think back to my childhood, and for some of you like me, I'm getting older. I have to think back way further than I used to have to. But I think every single person, when you look back at your childhood, we all realize that we knew 2 vastly different types of kids growing up, right? There was at least one kid that you knew that had way too many rules, and there was at least one kid that you knew that had virtually no rules, right? How many of you, it's like specific kids are coming to your mind right now? You're like, oh yeah, I can think of each one of those, and some of you are like, uh-oh, I think I might be raising one of those kids right now, and you're a little bit nervous about what I'm going to say. But like, there was each one of these kids in every circle that I ran in when I was growing up, right? There was the kid who had like way too many rules. It was like everything was a rule on top of a rule. The kid couldn't do anything. There was this one kid I remember whose mom always put sunscreen on him every single day. And we lived in Iowa, and so it was just like, it is literally snowing outside, and we're going to be inside all day. The only time this kid is going to be outside is going from your car to our house in a full snowsuit. Why is he wearing sunscreen? You know, the mom was always like, you never know. You can never be too careful. And I'm like, I think you can, and you are. This is the type of kid where, like, when you find out they're coming over, you may have had a plan about what you were going to do, but now you've got to change that plan because that kid is not allowed to do anything. You're like, well, we can't watch that movie, okay, because it's Disney and it's G, but there's some reason his parents have conjured up why it's satanic. And so we cannot watch that. We can't do any of the things I thought we were going to do. I'm not sure what toys they're allowed to play with. Like, there was just so many restrictions on their life that it was complicated to hang out with them. Then you knew the kid that had virtually no rules. And when you were a kid, this was the kid that you were jealous of. They were living your dream. They were doing all the things you wish you could have done. They could do whatever they wanted to, right? Like, legend has it, they would occasionally eat ice cream for breakfast. Apparently, they'd already seen a rated R movie by the second grade, right? You're like, wow. You would try and bring them up when your parents was like, no parents would allow their kids to do this. You're like, I know a kid. And they're like, that kid doesn't count, right? Because he was basically unsupervised, which is why you always wanted to hang out at his house because his parents were never there. And you could pretty much get away with whatever you wanted to do. Now, as we dive into these primal questions, it's important to remember that like each of our primal questions are the byproduct of two things. Really, your natural disposition, so just sort of the way your biological makeup is, and your formative experiences, specifically the things that happen to you in your first 5 years of life. And so if you grew up in a really like overprotected or over-permitted environment, oftentimes the primal question that imprints on you is, am I safe? Meaning, like, am I protected and prepared and able to survive this? The messages that you sort of internalized as you were growing up were like, man, the world is dangerous, and so you've got to be on your guard because anything could happen, and most of those things are probably bad, okay? So you've got to be prepared. And this is especially true if you suffered any sort of abuse growing up. Whether that be verbal or physical or sexual, it imprints on you, it puts you on edge. But it's not just that. It's those of us that grew up in an environment where nothing was allowed, and so we are overly cautious about everything in the world. And it's also those of us for which everything was allowed. And so we learned that, like, we have to look out for ourselves because nobody else cares about what's going on with us and what happens with us. I tell you that if you felt unsafe as a kid, you're likely anxious as an adult. And some of you are like, that's where that comes from? Most likely. And this probably, if you have this, is not a trait that you enjoy. You don't like feeling this tremendous amount of anxiety all the time. In fact, it's often very debilitating. You wish you were different. You wish that you could take a trip without anticipating, every imaginable travel mishap, from forgetting to pack your underwear to getting mugged in the bathroom at the airport. You're envisioning all of these things 3 weeks out, which is why you've got to be on your guard. You wish you could get a text from your boss without feeling sick to your stomach immediately and assuming the only reason they'd ever want to talk to you is to fire you. And you're trying to figure out what you did to deserve it. You wish you could just relax when your kids are out late at night. Even though curfew hasn't yet happened, they've still got 2 minutes to go. You wish you could just calm down instead of imagining all of these worst case scenarios in which they probably got in an accident or abducted by a drug cartel. Those are the only two options that in your mind seem reasonable. You wish you could just get like a basic headache without automatically assuming it is a brain tumor, I have cancer, or something worse, and then you waste the rest of your night just doom scrolling WebMD, just like, I have it, I have all these diseases, I'm going to die. When am I safe is your primal question, you have this sort of natural disposition in looking at the world. Your impulse is to, first of all, imagine the worst. Right? You are always thinking of the future, and most of your scenarios involve absolute destruction. You're just like, you know what? Things might be fine now, but this situation is not going to work out. Obviously, this relationship that's amazing is not going to work out long term. It's eventually going to fall apart, and then I'm going to lose everything, and I'm going to have nothing, and I'm eventually going to be living under a bridge huffing glue. And people are like, this is one tardy that you're receiving in 7th grade. And you're like, no, it's huff and glue under a bridge. That's where it's going. You also find yourself obsessively collecting information. You think man, if I knew more about this situation, I would calm down. But the problem with this is that you tend to only reference sources that require more caution, not less. Right? They affirm your fears, and in your research, you always uncover more things to be afraid of that you never even thought about before. You're like, not only am I still afraid of this, but now I'm afraid of several more things that I've looked deeper into it. And so obviously, I'm going to want to keep these fear prompts going, and so I'm going to turn on every single notification so that at any imaginable point in time, I can get a notification that something else is happening in the world to be frightened of. You want to control your experiences. You want to decide when and where and at what time and how you're going to do whatever it is you're going to do well in advance. You usually don't like surprises. You don't like last-minute changes. They're so frustrating. And in your mind, the reason why that doesn't work is that every little detail needs to be accounted for. In fact, you know what? If we're going to make plans, let's meet at my house. Let's go in my car to a place that I've been to a few times so I can order the same thing I always get because that feels comfortable to me. And if that's not something you're willing to do, too stressful, I can't be there. You avoid reliance. You don't want to really depend on anyone. You'd prefer that nobody really know too much about you or what you're going through. You often withhold information because information is control. In other words, they can't hurt you with something that they don't know about you. And so, you don't really need to tell everybody everything. And you get annoyed when other people reveal things about you that you don't want everybody to know. You never put all your eggs in one basket because everybody knows that the handles on baskets break and then the eggs smash and then you're screwed. And so you don't trust it. And the other thing that you tend to do is you have multiple backup plans. Nothing lasts forever, and so you are always plotting what's next, even when you're in the middle of something good. You buy the insurance, you hedge your bets, you never go all in, you develop multiple skill sets, you memorize all of the exits, you always have an out, you are always prepared to walk away and just start over at a moment's notice. And some of you are like, how do you know everything about me? This is exactly how I live. And some of you are like, I think I understand my mom for the first time in my life. And here's the thing you should know. If this is you or if this is somebody that you know, you're not trying to be like this. It's just happening to you. And it affects the people around you in ways that you don't want it to. Sometimes you can actually actively feel yourself sabotaging a situation or a relationship, and even as it is unfolding in slow motion, you can't stop yourself from doing what you're doing. And sure, there are rare moments where you feel safe, but they never seem to last because the minute something new or unexpected happens, your hypervigilant safety scramble begins, and once it starts, you don't know how to shut it off. And so if this is something that describes you, what do you do? I mean, what do you do with all of this? And I wish I knew. Good luck with your life. Let's close in prayer. No, I'm just kidding. I want us to actually look at the life of a biblical character who I think it's really likely had or internalized this primal question in their life. And in fact, we're going to do this all series long. We're going to match these primal questions with biblical characters that I think carried them within themselves to give you somebody to sort of see the outworking of these things in like a real person's life. And I want us to look at the life of a guy named Joseph. And maybe some of you are familiar if you colored the picture of Joseph in the coat of many colors. We're gonna hit that today, okay? So starts in Genesis chapter 37 is the beginning of his story. Starting in verse 3, it says this: Jacob, who's the father of this family, he loved Joseph more than any of his other children. And one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. His brothers hated him because their father loved him more, and they couldn't say a kind word about him. Now, the first thing I want to just point out about this environment is it's not really safe for anybody in the family, right? Like, the dad already has his favorite, so if you're not that kid, no matter what you do, no matter how impressive you are, no matter what you accomplish, you're never gonna get to that spot. And so that for you feels unsafe. And so maybe you think like, well, I'd rather be the favorite. But if you're the favorite, that's not really safe for you either, because your dad likes you, but everybody else hates you. And they are always trying to sabotage you because they want to see you fall and hurt. And that's not great. Like, this house growing up is full of tension where everyone is always sort of looking out for themselves and being pitted against one another. It says this in verse 18, that Joseph's brothers made plans to kill him. So not good. Already, some of you are like, yeah, that doesn't feel safe. But one said, you know what? Let's just throw him into an empty cistern. Then he'll die without us killing him. Man, the sinister people. So when Joseph arrived, they grabbed him and threw him in the cistern. And so now we have graduated, right, from an environment of emotional and relational, lack of emotional and relational safety, to now a lack of physical safety, because people are actively trying to hurt him, to injure him, to kill him. Now, they don't actually kill him, right? They just tell him they hate him, and they beat him severely, and they throw him into a well, and they sell him into slavery. Is that better? Some of you are like, just kill me. You know what I mean? I'd rather die than have to do all of that stuff. That sounds way worse. A while later, he gets sold into slavery. He gets transferred to Egypt, and we're told that he gets sold to this guy named Potiphar, who becomes his master. And it tells us that in Genesis 39, verse 3, that Joseph's master saw that he was successful in all that he did, so he put him in charge of his entire house. All his affairs ran smoothly and flourished, and so he gave Joseph complete administrative responsibility over everything he owned. Think about this for a minute. This is a slave boy who is now responsible for everything in this guy's house, everything he owns. He's a wealthy man with lots of property, lots of livestock, lots of servants, and somehow Joseph is in charge. And every single primal question has some sort of an upside. We called it last week, as we were giving the definitions of these terms, a primal gift. It's your ability in many ways to be able to give to others what you never got through the grace of God. And what I think is true about this primal gift is, man, when you think about it logically, when you are consistently scanning your surroundings for what's wrong and the worst that could happen, you realize a lot of things that other people don't, right? You know what needs double-checked and safeguarded and reorganized. You see details no one else sees. You are probably a decent manager, right? And the guy who is in charge is like, man, we need to give this guy responsibility because he is so paranoid, he safeguards everything around him. Like, if you are looking for someone to secure the perimeter, give that job to a paranoid person who's always looking out for their own safety. It goes on to say this in verse 6, that Joseph was a very handsome, well-built man, and his master's wife began to look at him lustfully. It gets a little scandalous here, just a warning. In other words, in case you're having trouble tracking, it's telling us like she liked Hebrew boys and she cannot lie. You know, that's basically, it's a Bible-y way of saying he's sexy, okay? He was a sexy young boy. It says this in verse 12, that she grabbed him by the cloak, demanding, sleep with me. You know that is the G-rated version. He tore himself away, but he left his cloak. That's a mistake. She kept it until her husband came home. He was furious when he heard her story, and he threw Joseph in prison. And I got to tell you, people that fall into this category, that have this primal question, this is why people with this question tend to continually dream up worst case scenarios, because they've lived through a few. Like this guy, Joseph in this story, he goes to prison because he was lied about and he didn't do anything wrong. And in fact, we know culturally, you know what typically the punishment for making a move on the master's wife is for a slave? Immediate death. So the fact that he goes to prison means that the husband was like, she probably lying. You know what I mean? But listen, I got to do something or else, it's going to be uncomfortable at home. So you got to go to jail, buddy. That's what's got to happen. And man, if you are a person with the am I safe primal question, this is your ultimate nightmare. Being accused and convicted and held responsible for something you did not do wrong, right? And when that thing happens to you, it just gives you more evidence to not feel safe. You're like, see, this is why you got to be on your guard. You can't trust anybody. I mean, like, it doesn't matter what you do, how good you are, how smart you are, how many things you do right, how careful you are, how many rules you follow, how high up you go in the organization. You can't trust people. Somebody's going to betray you, something bad is going to happen, and everything is going to fall apart. It goes on to say in verse 22, this is Joseph's in prison now. It says, but before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners and everything in the prison. Put the paranoid person in charge of the prison. Why? Because the guy that's in charge is looking at me and be like, listen, I got to tell you, I don't know what this kid's deal is, but he is the best at figuring out like who's out to get who and who can't be trusted and who needs extra supervision. And he's like can identify all of the areas where people will be most likely to escape. He thinks of details I've never thought of. He's been here 15 minutes. I've been doing this job 15 years. Give this kid a promotion. And what's interesting is Joseph is not trying to get a promotion. He is just trying to ensure his own protection. But the byproduct of this is people are like, man, I would like to leverage that skill set. And even though it means way more work for him, Joseph is sort of reluctantly willing to do that work because he thinks what all people with the question of am I safe think is like, I don't really want to do that. But if I am in charge, if I'm the one who does it, it'll get done right. Right? And that feels way safer than having to trust somebody else to do it. Why? You cannot trust other people. The world is not safe. This is how everyone with this question tends to think. And eventually, for Joseph, he does get out of the prison. And he does so by interpreting the dreams. Right? And what is a dream, right? A dream is where your imagination puts together all of the different pieces of your psyche. And Joseph is like, yeah. I know how to make sense of all the weird stuff you think of because you're afraid of real stuff in real life. And so Joseph, it comes out of the prison because he's able to interpret one of Pharaoh's skinny cow dreams. And you can go read all about it. It's amazing. Not about the ice cream, but about actual skinny cows. And he says this. This is Joseph's interpretation of Pharaoh's dream. Genesis 41, verse 29. He says, the next 7 years will be prosperous, but afterwards, there's going to be 7 years of famine. And they're going to be so severe that the memory of the good years will be erased. So you should collect crops, store, and safeguard them. I think it's interesting that not only is Joseph able to interpret this dream, which we see that he's being empowered by God, right? To leverage this thing that is sort of a staple of who he is to actually do good in the lives of other people. This is how God takes what is wrong and leverages it for something that is right. And the reason he's able to do this is partially because he's given over to God this primal question that he has. But he doesn't just know how to interpret the dream. He knows what they should do as a result of the dream. Joseph knows exactly what to do. And I don't think this is uncommon for people with this primal question. Because people with the primal question of, am I safe, often know what to do when things fall apart because they've already thought through it. It's likely they've envisioned this exact terrifying situation many, many times before. People with the primal question of, am I safe, are often seem anxious when everybody else is calm and calm when everybody else is anxious. And the reason is because everyone else is like, oh no, what do? We've never thought about this. And the person who's wondering if they're safe is like, I've thought about this so many times. That was when you guys were fine and I was freaking out, and now I'm fine because I've already thought through what to do. I've got a go bag and a backup plan. Follow me. This is where this headspace is. And when Pharaoh hears him outline what should be done, Pharaoh's like, you should just do it. You know what I mean? Like, it sounds like you know what you're doing. I can't say this enough. Put the paranoid person in charge of protection because nothing gets by them. And also, Pharaoh is just like, make the suspicious guy the gatekeeper of distributing the food. Why? Because they're really good at like finding out and seeing who's out to trick them and who can't be trusted, and who's maybe trying to run a con on them. And so make that person the person everybody has to go through to prove their story is true to get what they need to get in the long run. And what's crazy is as time goes on, although at the time people thought he was panicked and paranoid, everything happens just as Joseph predicted. And eventually, as a result of this, his brothers come begging him for food. The same guys who beat him and tortured him and said horrible things about him, the same guys who created a lot of the safety issues that he has, come and are now begging him for food. Some of you are like, this is my dream. It says in chapter 42, verse 7, that Joseph recognized them instantly but pretended not to and spoke harshly to them. That tracks. They didn't know it was him, though. And again, what we see here is something that's common for people with this primal question. People who don't feel safe often hide parts of themselves to keep from getting hurt. And before Joseph reveals himself fully to the people around him, before he gives them more information about who he is and the power that he has and what he's thinking and what he could do, he's going to run a series of trust experiments first to see if they're still the same manipulative liars that he used to know. Like, are they going to protect one another in like high-risk scenarios, or are they going to throw each other under the bus like they used to do when I was a part of the family? What's going to actually happen? Have these people changed at all? Have they matured, or are they just as volatile and reactionary as they were before? And this is actually wise, Because as we established in the last series, wise people trust those who've proven trustworthy. But they also go a step further. When they've matured and dealt with some of their trust issues, they also provide people with chances to establish a new track record. They give them small opportunities to rebuild trust slowly. And this is what Joseph is doing with his brothers. He gives them small opportunities and he notices that they are different, that they have changed, that they have grown more compassionate and less fearful, that they are more of a collective, that they do stick up for each other in ways that they never did when they and he were younger. It says in Genesis chapter 45 that when Joseph could stand it no longer, he told them who he was. And then he broke down and wept. Please come closer, he said, and so they did. And he said, I am Joseph, your brother, who you sold into slavery. He lets his guard down, he drops the facade, and he allows himself to be vulnerable. And anybody in here with this primal question is like, that does not sound safe. And that's because it's not, you're right. But this risk that he takes leads to redemption. He makes this conscious decision to stop holding every single person in his life at arm's length, to bring a select few close. Come closer. Come a little bit closer. As he has built more trust and as he sees certain people as proving they're trustworthy, he's like, come a little bit closer. I'm not going to stiff arm you. And he's open and he's honest with them. And it begins to redeem him and them. And I think this just may be many of our redemptive paths as well. Especially if you have this primal question, when fear tempts you to be overly cautious, instead of scrambling and ruminating and isolating yourself away from everyone, remind yourself that leveraging community to move beyond your comfort zone is how you grow. This is why it's important to find a spiritual community with close friends that you can trust, that will be there for you, that share your value system, that will help you move beyond your past hurts and establish peace in the present. And as a result of this, not only does Joseph begin to heal, but he becomes the protector of everyone who never protected him. Like, think about that for a minute. God uses a guy who never ever felt safe to save the world, including all of the people who gave him his safety issues to begin with. Like, that is ultimate God-centered redemption that can only happen when you give your life over to God. Later, Joseph tells his whole family, his brothers included, in Genesis chapter 50, verse 19, don't be afraid. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. He put me in a position to save the lives of many. Don't be afraid. I'll continue to take care of you. And he reassured them by speaking kindly to them. Think about this for a minute. The people in your life who either are the origin of your safety issues or trigger your safety issues, is reassuring them by speaking kindly anywhere on your impulse list? No, which means that there has been some sort of deep redemption that has happened in his heart. I think it's so fascinating that he keeps reiterating to them over and over again, hey, don't be afraid, don't be afraid, don't be afraid, don't be afraid. It's him telling them, like, you are safe. I don't know if you're wondering if you are, but I got to tell you, as I was growing up, I always did, and there was nobody there to reassure me. There was no one looking out for me. There was no one there to protect me. And so I'm going to do it for you now that I have an opportunity. He gives to others what it was he never got. And in doing so, God redeems the pain that he went through. the stuff that he survived. And maybe you're thinking, well, good for them. I don't have a Joseph to tell me that I'm safe. And then back it up with an unlimited budget of all of that Egypt oil money. I don't have that in my life. No one's looking out for me. And I still constantly think about, worst case scenarios. And I'm anxious all the time. What am I supposed to do? And the Apostle Paul in the New Testament writes to us. In fact, he writes to this young man that he's mentoring, who I think is likely deals with some of these same safety, fear, paranoia issues. And he tells him this, in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power, love, and a sound mind. First of all, it's telling us that if you're experiencing a tremendous amount of fear and anxiety, God's not mad at you for it, but he also didn't give that to you. He didn't put that on you. That is not from him. What it is that God is giving you and wants you to exercise in your life is a spirit of power, love, and a sound mind. And you probably heard this verse before, but never really thought about maybe the implications of each of these words, because each of them carries a significant weight, and not only a weight, but a path to actually bring us to inner peace. I want to just dissect these words: power, love, and sound mind. When he says power, he's saying essentially, listen, use the power that you have in areas where you do have control to do what's right and noble and fair and kind, no matter what other people do. Because here's the reality: you can't control other people. The only thing you can really control is what you do and what you expose yourself to. And what Paul is telling Timothy is, I think, the same thing God would be telling us. Look around in the situation in which you were feeling tremendously anxious and acknowledge what you do have control of and leverage that to proactively do something good. And at the same time, if something in your life or something that you're doing repetitively or taking in is making you paranoid, stop doing it. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people that are like, you know what? Just, when I watch the news constantly in the background at my work the whole day, 5 hours of bad news, I start to feel anxious. And I'm like, maybe just turn that off then. Do you need 5 hours of that? When I'm scrolling through Instagram every night and I look at how beautiful some of these other girls are, I feel like I'm fat. It's like, maybe just unfollow them. You know what I mean? That could be a solution. And we hear this stuff and we're like, well, that would never work. And it's like, wouldn't it? You have the power to decide what inputs you're taking in and what you're paying attention to, what you're focusing on. Leverage that power wisely. Then he says love. And essentially what he's saying is, instead of making decisions based on, how can I best insulate me, begin to make decisions in your life based on how can I best love them. Because that's what it is to love others like Christ loves you. In fact, another place in Scripture, it says that demonstrating love, actually living out sacrificial love, is what drives away fear from us and other people. Paul is telling us, make decisions according to what's most loving, not what is most insulating. Because love is what is going to save you and them. And then he encourages us that God has given us a sound mind. And he's saying, listen, we all know this, you know this. Anxious people don't think clearly. But the answer isn't to throw caution to the wind of you know what, I just shouldn't be anxious, I should just do whatever. It's to be of sound mind, right? To look at a situation from all sides, to acknowledge that there's good and bad inside of the situation, and to make a level-headed, not fearful decision about what to do next. To actually spend time processing with people who counterbalance your overactive anxiety with calm rationality. In other words, don't put yourself around people who are just you're scared about that? Me too. Let's be scared together. Isn't that what we do, though? Let me find an article where someone else is just as paranoid. Ah! And we're I wonder why I'm never calm. Find people in life who have this calm rationality. When you are spinning out, that you can sit down with and be I know I'm prone to paranoia, and so I'm thinking this, I saw this, and I'm thinking this. And they're okay, yeah, wow, there's a lot there. Is this also true, though? And what about this, and this? What about these realities that you've totally edited out of the picture so that you can stay fearful? They don't say it judgingly or condescendingly. It's kind, it's compassionate, it's calm, and it brings you down. You need these people in your life. And maybe some of you are thinking like, this is awesome. Like if I do all these things, you're saying nothing bad will ever happen to me. No, it's going to. It's definitely going to still be bad at times. But here's what this is promising us. That when the bad stuff comes into your life, that in the middle of it, you're not going to fall apart. And even better, you're not going to live every moment leading up to it in complete dread. And that's where some of us are. We are living in such anxiety that whether the thing happens or not doesn't even matter because we're living with anxious dread every single day. In fact, one psalmist said it this way, Psalm chapter 46, verse 1. He says, God is my refuge and strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. So I will not fear when earthquakes come and mountains crumble into the sea. And I think this is such an interesting meditation that's being written here. Because essentially what it's saying is this, FYI, the earthquakes are coming. Right? Mountains that you're just like, that'll never go anywhere. It's probably going to crumble and fall into the sea. Right? Like bad things are going to happen. You are going to have times of trouble. That's life. But God is with you. God is for you in the midst of those moments. You can trust him to care for you and give you the strength, not just to survive those moments, but to thrive in the midst of those moments, just like Joseph. So let me just give you a couple like really practical things. If you are, this is the homework portion, in case you're just like, what are we being graded on? This is what it is, okay? If this is your question, here's what I would suggest to you. When your anxiety revs up, ask the people around you who've proven safe to you to remind you of the power you do have, the love you can give, and the sound options you can choose. Because if you're anxious in that moment and not feeling safe, you're not thinking about any of that stuff. You're thinking about all the places you're powerless, not where you do have power, right? You're thinking about how to protect yourself, not how to act lovingly. And you can only think of the options that will end in destruction, not the options that actually could put you on a path to success and safety. And if you know somebody or love somebody with this question, my suggestion to you would be when their anxiety revs up, ask them like what you can do to help them feel safe instead of assuming that you know what that is. Because a lot of times we're just like, you know what, you're fine. That is not helpful. Ask them, what can I do to help you feel safe? And then be a kind, calm presence and remind them why they are not ultimately doomed. You can't just say you are not doomed. You got to give actual reasons. Because as we've established in this Joseph story, they're clocking all the details. Their brain has just edited out all the good ones. You have to actually, if you want to calm them down, bring up details that prove to them that they are not doomed, that things actually have a way of working out from here. And you yelling that at them doesn't make them feel any calmer. Have you ever calmed anybody down by being like, calm down? Right? Not really. You may have gotten them quiet because they peed themselves and then just felt ashamed. But being calm and kind and reassuring is how we help calm people down because they end up mirroring us in the midst of that moment. And I would tell you, like, whether you are somebody who has this question or knows somebody who's in a relationship with somebody or married to somebody who has a kid with this question, there is a path forward. These things that we think are bad are not bad. They're just realities. And God wants to channel this stuff inside of us, this mixture of our natural disposition and our formative experiences, Some of the things that happened to us were not intentional, some of them were, but no matter if the person intended it for harm, God wants to channel all that into something good. God wants to give you a peace at the core of your life. Can you imagine if you were able to get to a place where you didn't live every day in anxious fear? God says, with me, this is possible. And God says, if you know someone like this, it's possible to help them get to this place by pointing them to me and by reflecting me in your relationship to them. This is what I want to pray into your life today, that whether this is your question or whether you know someone with this question, that you would lean into and reflect Jesus, and that as you do, things would change within you and bring you a sense of peace no matter what is happening around you. Would you bow your heads across this room as I pray this into your life today? God, thank you so much for how much you love us, for the way you made us. And God, for the way that you take everything about us and you fashion it into something that could not only be for our good, but for the good of the others in our lives. God, some of us grew up in environments and in situations that made us feel incredibly safe. Some of us were not safe physically. Some of us, we lived in environments, they just weren't safe emotionally or relationally. We always felt like we had to be looking out for ourselves because nobody else was, or we were made to feel paranoid about the world by somebody who was a little bit paranoid themselves. And man, that imprinted on us in a very deep and specific way. And now we carry this anxiousness with us that you did not design us for. And God, you're giving us a path to begin to move from that place toward you to a place of peace. God, leverage every one of our detail-oriented observations to make the environments and the situations and the people groups around us safer, more conscientious, like running smoother. God, help us to give away what we felt like we didn't get. Help us to extend safety even to those who made us feel unsafe. And God, I pray that as we continue to live with this question, that you would leverage it to do good and not harm. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.